Welcome to the Confluence Cast presented by Columbus Underground. We are a weekly Columbus-centric podcast focusing on the civics, lifestyle, entertainment, and people of our city. I'm your host, Tim Fulton. This week, in anticipation of this fall's election, the Confluence Cast is endeavoring to introduce Columbus voters to the 12 council and 2 mayoral candidates in their own words. Joe Motil wants your support to become the 54th mayor of the 14th largest city in America, and he's going door to door and person to person in a grassroots effort to ask for that support. In today's interview, Motil talks about his history in Central Ohio politics and his campaign platform. You can get more information on what we discussed today in the show notes for this episode at theconfluencecast.com. Enjoy the interview. Sitting down here with Joe Motil, candidate for mayor of the city of Columbus. Joe, how are you, sir?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate
Absolutely. Let's start off with, who are you and what brings you to your candidacy?
Who am I? Wow. I am a lifelong resident of Columbus, and I'm one of 11 children. I'm the 7th of 11. And actually, I just briefly want to say a little bit about my family. My father grew up in a mining town in southeastern Ohio in a 2-room house with his 7 people, and eventually made his way up to Columbus. He did live with some foster homes and also at the St. Vincent de Paul Orphanage over on East Main Street for a while, as did some of his siblings. And he eventually also then moved over to the Grandview Heights area.
Okay.
And that's where he met my mom, who also lived there. My father went to Our Lady of Victory High School. She went to Grandview High School. She was one of the siblings of the famous Eagles Candies. Which has been around for a long, long time, and there's still one store left, but my grandparents were the original founders of the Eagles Candies. And my father, after World War II, he received, it was a GI Bill basically back then. He went to engineering school up in Wisconsin. It wasn't actually to become an engineer, but to learn engineering.
Okay.
And when he came back, he got into the construction industry and became a carpenter out of Local 200, and then eventually worked his way up as to a general superintendent. And my mother, of course, did not work.
Okay.
Had to take care of 11 kids. So I was actually born in the North Linden area. That's where my parents' first home was. And I would only live there for less than a year, and they moved over to Clintonville. I grew up on Clinton Heights between Calumet and Indianola, in a fairly good-sized home. It was 4 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, had an entrance foyer, sunroom, lunchroom. It was a pretty good-sized house for 13 people, I should say. But it was a great neighborhood to live in. And, growing up Catholic, my parents were very devout Catholics. And I went to Immaculate Conception grade school, which was virtually across the street from where I lived on Clinton Heights. We just cut through the backyard of the house in front of the school. The people, we knew them very well. They were our neighbors, so it was no big deal.
Yeah.
And so I went to school there for 8 years. Oh, I have to mention I went to kindergarten at Clinton Elementary down the street. But and then went to Watterson for 4 years. And most of my siblings all went to Immaculate Conception, and some of them went to North High School, which was just, about 10 blocks down the street, basically, down Calumet. And we were, as kids, very involved with sports. My dad played sports, and we just grew up playing baseball, basketball, and football, the 3 basic sports, a lot of us. And during the summertime, I had a brother who actually played Division I football at Indiana University, played on a state championship team at Watterson High School in 1966. My sister Rose played on the first women's professional football team in Columbus, the Columbus Pacesetters. They used to play at Mohawk over on Livingston Avenue. And she also played semi-pro professional softball. I played basketball was my favorite sport, and I was a walk-on at Youngstown State University on the junior varsity. I only went to school there for a year. I had to pay my own way, so I just didn't have the money. And when I came back, I went to Ohio State for about 6 weeks, couldn't stand it. They put me over on West Campus.
Okay.
And I wanted to be where things were happening on the Oval. To me, that was, growing up and seeing Ohio State University, I wanted to go to school on the Oval. So one of those buildings there. And so I really couldn't stand it. So the rule in the Motil house was, if you're not going to school, you have to leave the house. And
okay.
And get a job and move out. So that was it. So I moved to South Campus, just like a lot of my friends did, from the Clintonville area. It's cheap rent. I lived near the corner of West 8th and Hunter. Mm-hmm. And for 8 years there, I shared a 1-bedroom apartment with mice and bugs, and I was able to save up enough money to buy my first home on East Oakland Avenue. And I actually began my activism while living on South Campus. And I'm going to have to mention his name.
Yeah.
I like to do this, but I was at the laundromat on Worthington Street one day, and this guy comes up to me and he says, "Hey, do you live in the neighborhood?" And I said, "Yeah." And then he started to describe how there were a couple of houses that had just been pretty much renovated, new siding and stuff like that, just a couple years ago. And apparently somebody had peeled off the siding with crowbars and stuff and vandalized the properties. Well, apparently, after discussion with the gentleman, which happened to have been Cleve Ricksecker, and
okay,
and a good friend of mine,
yep.
I still say, and he lived on Worthington Street at the time. Apparently, the landlord, the owner of the property, had hired people to do this, and so that he could justify tearing these structures down and building a larger apartment building. And it was real close to where I lived. And I said, "Yeah, I noticed everything. I didn't know, what was going on," and so forth and so on. So he, and either it was his wife or girlfriend at the time, Barb Cooley, who I still know to this day and is a good friend and was a neighbor of mine on East Oakland. I'll get into that in a second.
Okay.
But they were looking for support in the neighborhood, to go down to the building department and talk to some official down there about this. So I tagged along with them, and that's kind of like where it got started. And I started to notice a lot of different things taking place. And this was close to when I was just about ready to buy my first house anyway. This is probably around 84, 85.
Okay.
So my first home, I wanted to stay in the university area, and I would ride my bicycle up and down East Northwood and East Oakland Avenue nightly almost, waiting for a for sale sign to pop up. I had no idea. I was 30 years old at the time. I had no idea how to buy a house, what a realtor was, or anything like that. But so when I saw a sign come up, I immediately knocked on the door, and the gentleman was there, and his father had passed, his mother was going into retirement home, and he was selling the house. And I was like, I will put it on an offer tomorrow. Mm-hmm. I found a realtor who was a friend of my sister's, who she had used in the past, and we worked it out from there, and I made an offer on the house. And it's interesting that one of the things that he was an attorney, and he asked me that, he says, "Are you going to live here?" And I just was puzzled by the question, like, what do you, like, of course I'm going to live here. This is why I want to buy the house. And so I didn't know why he was asking the question, but I said, "Yeah, of course." And I said, "I work in the construction industry, and this is a fixer-upper, I can tell, and things need to be done inside. A lot of things, the kitchen was old, the carpet was on the floor, and blah, blah, blah. But the woodwork was just absolutely gorgeous. There was stained glass windows in the house. It had 3 fireplaces, 1 in the bedroom upstairs, 2 downstairs. It was just an unbelievable home. It had a stairwell that led to the kitchen in the back and what have you. So I loved it, and bought the house for, I think it was $61,900 or something like that in 1985. And I had saved up enough money. My rent in 1978, I believe, was $90 a month for my 1-bedroom apartment, and had only increased by 1985 to $130. So I was working in the construction industry, and had most of the time I was working as a union laborer. I got into the union in 1981, but I worked for a non-union seasonal contractor, concrete contractor for 2 years prior to that, and that was some pretty tough going, to say the least. But anyways, so that was my first home. And I will say this, back in those days, I mean, in the late 70s when I lived on South Campus, it was pretty interesting. There was still a widowed woman that lived across the street from us. She was in their 70s. There were families there. There were kids on South Campus. There were people that owned 2-unit houses and rented one side and lived in the other. I mean, it was a great neighborhood to really grow up in. I mean, to live in as a renter. And it's changed, of course, dramatically since. But, there were some tough times for me living there when I had to actually, seasonal work, concrete work. I worked from basically April to November, and I'd be on unemployment all winter. And that was tough. And there was a point in my time when I had to file to receive food stamps for 3 months. I'll never forget, I had one of those blue books that you used to collect coins with. Yeah. And I had Kennedy halves. And I mean, I treasured this thing, but I had to sell it in order to, pay my rent. And
you had to pop them out and cash them in.
I mean, it was something that I treasured so much. And I was just like, it was tough. And so, once I got, I'm not blaming the non-union job or not making enough money, but it was seasonal work. So once I got into the labor's union in 1981, I was able to work full time in the commercial construction industry. So on East Oakland Avenue, when I got my house there, I found out, this is funny, here's Cleve Ricksecker and Barb Cooley, who live up the street from me. I mean, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. And there's a lot of professors from OSU and families and kids. We had a daughter at the time that lived there, and she went to Maderi Elementary for a couple years and then went to Duxbury Elementary. But so I began getting real involved in the neighborhood there. Barb was involved with Columbus Landmarks at the time, and she kind of recruited me to try to get the neighborhood placed on the Columbus Register of Historic Places, the Northwood Park subdivision, which was Northwood Park from Northwood and Oakland from High to Indianola. So I was the person who went door to door explaining to everybody, the importance of it. And one of the reasons we did this, or she did this, was the fact that developers were just tearing down houses left and right in the area. And there were homes on Norwich that people on Northwood would just look out their back of their windows and see them being torn down. So they were concerned that the developers are going to hit us next. They're just going to move north and keep going. So we looked at it in terms of protection from the developers, in terms of becoming an historic district and giving us some power to stop the any kind of demolitions of historic homes that we lived in. I mean, I saw beautiful Victorian homes being torn down in the South Campus area and all over the place. And so anyways, I was the one that went door to door. We did get placed on the Columbus Register, and I ran for a seat on the University Area Commission. I believe it was in 1988, and won that seat and was the zoning chair during that time as well. And so I got involved with development, zoning, code enforcement issues, things like that. I worked directly with code enforcement officers. It was, back then, it was a lot different. We used fax machines a lot back then. And I would actually just walk the neighborhood and write down violations and fax them off to the code enforcement officer who knew me. And at one point in time, he said, Joe, if it weren't for you, I wouldn't have a job. And I mean, and I have to admit, I would be real careful about who I would write violations on, and they were mostly going to be developers or people that own rental properties that weren't taking care of their properties and not necessarily homeowners. And also businesses on High Street. I would be rolling my daughter down the sidewalk in her stroller down High Street over just sidewalk that was just crumbling and crumbling. I was just sick and tired of it. So I was real involved with the code enforcement issues and things, and that is also living so close to Tuttle Park Recreation Center. After my 3 years on the area commission, I decided that I wasn't going to run again, and I wanted to kind of just concentrate my efforts and things on just maybe one thing. So a woman who was the head of the Tuttle Park Community Recreation Council heard me speak at a public meeting about some concerns I had about Tuttle Park. So she approached me after the meeting and said, hey, you should come to one of our meetings. And I did. And she pretty much sucked me into it. And I've been there ever since 1991. I've been the head of the volunteer group for 32 years now. Okay. And so it's just been a labor of love. Even though I don't live in the campus area anymore, we left in 93, I believe it was. We sold the house and moved back to Clintonville. Even to this day, I'm the university area district has always been a part of my life.
Yeah.
Growing up in Clintonville, I mean, I can remember in the 60s going to the head shops, buying your black light posters and walking through the beads and all that stuff on Pearl Alley and all that. I mean, it was part of your life. Even as a paper boy, I delivered the Citizen Journal when I was in grade school. I can remember riding my bicycle down the lane in High when the Vietnam War riots were taking place. And you couldn't get past Lane and High because they had it blocked off. But I mean, we all knew it was going on, and I just had to go down there and see, what was happening. But they had the street blocked off. You couldn't go anywhere because of what was going on. But, like I said, it's always been part of my life. The record shops, the bars, the nightclubs, and such. Even in high school, when all those bars used to be down there at Papa Joe's Travel Agency and all that kind of stuff. I mean, that was my era.
And it's Tuttle Park that you're still involved in.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yep. Tuttle's been great. I've been through 6 directors at Recreation and Parks. And what we finally did sometime in the mid-90s, I think it was, we asked the city of Columbus if we could charge for parking for the OSU football games because it's prime location. Varsity club's right up the street on Norwich there. The stadium's 2 blocks away. And so one of the CRC members suggested, and we were like, yeah, why not? Let's see what happens. So we asked them. They gave us the go-ahead. We parked some cars up near the rec center. We were charging like $5, and we made a little bit of money. And then we, began to talk about it more and decided to use both parking lots, the one that was behind what was then the old Holiday Inn on the lane. And so the lower parking lot, as we refer to it. And then we started parking cars in both lots. And it became a really good fundraiser after a few years, after we got things organized and what have you. And we were never out to like gouge the people. We were just out to make some money that would go directly back into the rec center. Yeah. And similar to a PTA, we're doing stuff at, you know. Exactly. And it worked out great. And to this day, we're still doing it. I think this is it's either our 26th or 27th year that we've actually done this fundraiser. And we've probably raised, I'm just guessing, somewhere between $400,000 and maybe $500,000. That's great. And the money has gone directly back into the park. I mean, when people that are familiar with Tuttle go down there and you see benches and you see receptacles and you see murals and other things, and that was all funded through our fundraising. Got it. A lot of, and all the maintenance and things like that are done on the gardens. There's a pollinator garden, memorial garden, butterfly garden, all that stuff. That's all funded through our CRC group, and now the CRC they're no longer in existence, and we're kind of tied in with the Columbus Recreation and Parks Foundation. Got it. So we're now the Friends of Tuttle Park, and 30% of our proceeds for our fundraising now go towards what's called the Play program. Okay. And Play is designed to help fund for children and teens that can't afford to get into programs that cost money. The fees there at the center, So that helps provide the fees. So they get 30% of our fundraising, which is fine. It's worked out well. We actually used to provide funds to Play just on our own, but now that things have changed, we kind of haggled a little bit about the 30%. We thought that was a lot. So we said, well, wait a minute, how about 20? But they wouldn't budge, so we had to settle for the 30. But it's been great. We just we got a skate park that was just put in 2 years ago now. I think it's been almost a year and a half. Unfortunately, though, things move so slow with recs and parks. That skate park took 6 years to go in. Okay. And I'm not going to get into too much of the detail about that. Fair. There are some sore spots with that, but it just took too long. And, being a big proponent of recreation and parks is actually part of my campaign too. Okay. I mean, it's like I have witnessed that budget get slashed and slashed and slashed over the decades. I mean, it used to be one of the Cadillac departments of the city of Columbus back when Mel Dodge, and people have heard of Dodge Park. Well, Mel Dodge was a director who really got money flowing into the recreation and park system. And I think just the fact that budget has been slashed so much has really had an impact on a lot of things that are taking place now in the city. So, yeah.
Bring us up a little bit to where you're at in terms of your activism and other sort of projects like that, and how it leads directly into your candidacy.
Sure. So when I got involved, when I was on the area commission and started to understand the politics of the city and the area commissions and this, that, and the other, I was going to meetings representing the university area on zoning issues, variances, and such. I was infuriated with the fact that it just seemed like city council would never listen to us. And it was just the same old thing. It's like, and people, on the area commission, they would work with council and folks, but I'm just like, to me, it was like, they're not doing anything for us. They're ignoring us. Why are you even working with these people? And I thought, the only way I'm going to make a difference is if I'm sitting in one of those 7 seats up there in that city council chambers. So in 1995, I decided that in 94 actually, I decided that I was going to run for city council. I had no idea what I was going to get into in terms of running for public office. I had never had any intentions of running for public office. It's interesting though. I was at a fundraiser once around 1993, and former state rep Mike Stenziano, who is the auditor's father, we knew each other real well. Actually, his ex-wife lived 2 houses from me on Oakland. We were talking once, and he said to me, he said, Joe, he said, one of these days when you run for office, this is going to be something that you're going to have to do or something. And I looked at him like, what are you talking about? Like, I have no intentions of running for office, but he obviously saw something in me in terms of the type of person I was and my activism and my outspokenness and such at the time. So I decided to run in 95 and in that election, and it was an unexpired term. And there were people in the Democratic Party that knew me personally and knew my family, but I didn't know a lot of the politicians, so to speak, that were involved with the Franklin County Democratic Party. I didn't know the chair, Denny White, at the time, or any of those people. But some of the people that knew me, went to him and said, yeah, we know the guy, blah, 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 know his family, so forth and so on. So, of course, they didn't want me to run. It was Lisa Griffin was the appointed city council member at the time. John Kennedy was president. She was pretty much, it's safe to say, she was handpicked by Kennedy. The council president typically had that power and authority and did so.
Okay.
They had, other people threw their hat in the ring. I believe Lynn Greer was one of them who thought she had a chance. And she had some people behind her on city council, but the council president had pretty much the votes.
Yeah.
So anyways, back then, during that election, you needed 1,707 signatures to get on the ballot.
Okay.
It was a percentage. It's not like it is now.
Of the population are elected. Yeah.
Right. So I drummed up 2,404 signatures to get on the ballot. And the Republicans also ran a candidate, Peggy Fisher. She was the head of the Northland Community Council at the time, and she was really not real involved in politics or anything at all.
Okay.
But Greg Lashupka was mayor, and the electorate was much different back in 1995. That was 8 years ago. So there were still Republican office holders in Columbus and such, on city council, county commissioners, and so forth. And even though the Franklin County Democratic Party tried to persuade me not to run, I said, no, I'm running. I don't care what you say. And I asked some good friends of mine who were involved with the party, I said, what's going to happen? They said, Joe, they're going to hate you because they'll be afraid that you're going to take away votes and she could lose. And I said, whatever. But I said, I'm running. I don't care. And so I ran. And Lisa Griffin, bless her heart, anyways. I have a great deal of respect for her, but she had her own consulting firm, and at the time, Tuttle Mall was being built out there on the west side, and she represented, I believe it was Edwards Company, who was the developer for Tuttle Mall, and she also was a consultant for the New Albany Company, and New Albany was trying to merge with Plain Township at the time. Okay. So she was the spokesperson for both of those groups, and she was considered the face of evil to those communities and those neighbors out there near Tuttle Mall and out in New Albany. So she would, be the one that attended the meetings and such and speak, and people didn't like her, and everybody felt she was just in the bed with the developers. So anyways, I'm getting phone calls from people that I don't even know. I mean, it's like out of the blue, like, we're so glad you're running, blah, blah, blah. We want to help you with your campaign. And I'm like, who in the hell are you? Who do I trust and what have you? And it was really very interesting to see what happened. And I'm just going to throw this out there to let people know. There was actually somebody who approached me. I had no idea who he was. He wouldn't tell me his name. He said his name was Sam. Okay. And it was a fictitious name. It was almost like Deep Throat.
Okay.
I mean, it was like he would call the house and one of my kids would answer, they're like 8, 10 years old, and he'd talk to him on the phone and they'd say, "Dad, it's Sam, he wants to talk to you."
Right.
So he was one of my mentors. And I finally, near the end of the election, he finally told me who he was and such. And it was pretty interesting, but
you're not going to tell us?
No, I'm not going to say who he is.
Okay.
You'll have to read my memoirs.
Fair. Fair.
But he was very involved with politics and such, and he knew what was going on, and he was involved with the media and talked to him and stuff. So he really taught me a lot in terms of campaigning and what needs to be done and the issues and so forth and so on. So anyways, election time comes around in November, and Griffin loses.
Okay.
By 8,000 votes. I get 11,000.
Okay.
So Peggy Fisher, the Republican Party, they saw that, Motil could be a spoiler in this. So they pumped a ton of money into a race. And LaSheka was mayor. And, of course, he got a hold of his connections in the city. And the media, during the campaign also, Griffin actually accepted a contract with the airport out of Columbus Airport, and it was and she was going to get paid $165 an hour for it, and that was like headlines in the paper. And me and Fisher both just jumped all over it. Yeah, and she actually she turned it down after a few weeks because she was catching so much flack. I mean, it really looked bad.
Well, but you just to bring it forward, you can see that I think in some of the campaigning that you're doing now,
sure,
right?
Oh yeah,
latching on to, hey, this is frankly fucked up. This is not great how this is going down. Yep. And there's a person we can put in front of it. And here's what I would do differently.
Yep.
Yeah.
You made the connections back then. The guy that was helping me, Sam, he had me looking at campaign finance reports and things like that. And I began to get a good understanding in terms of who's financing the campaigns, finding the connections between the companies, the corporations, the developers, the big money, who the players are. I learned all that early on, and I'm just 28 years ago. And so you can imagine where it's gone from there. I know where the bodies are buried and such. So anyways, yeah, after that campaign, the media, of course, would not say that, Motil was responsible for this election loss. That's the last time a city council incumbent lost an election, by the way. So, I moved on, and people in the Franklin County Democratic Party saw me as a potential asset for the party. So I wanted to run for state rep in 1996, immediately after, in my district, which was kind of like Clintonville, Worthington, Arlington, Linden. And it was basically like 65-35 Republican. E.J. Thomas was the state rep at the time. And there was a 18-year-old from Worthington High School that was going to run, and they said, "No, you can't. We're going to endorse this guy." And
we're going to let the kid take a fall, basically.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I'm like, "You got to be kidding me." I said, "My name's fresh from the council race, blah, blah, blah." And they said, "Joe, it's same old crap, party politics. You'll get your turn."
Yep.
So 98 came around, and they said, "Okay, we'll look at you." And they're not going to, they said, run in 98, your time will come. And I'll never forget, Rich Cordray was like the head of the committee. And I told him, okay, 98, time comes around, blah, blah, blah. Here I am. So in 98, E.J. Thomas was going to be term limited. That's when term limits in the State House first began. Yep. So I was like, this is perfect. He actually lived in Old Beachwald at the time, and I was living in Clintonville. I was living over on Walhalla Ravine. We had a very small 1,100 square foot cottage home. Okay. That was a fixer-upper. That's where we moved to after we moved from East Oakland Avenue.
Yeah.
And So I won the endorsement. It was a fight because there was a group of people that were trying to take it from me and give it to somebody else, but I had to struggle for it. And
I'm sorry, this is for state rep
state
again.
rep, yeah.
Got it.
And so I'll never forget Jennifer Bruner was in. I think she was the chair of the committee at the time, and I went to her law office. She called me up and told me, "Hey, we're endorsing you." So this was prior to the committee, the full vote of the central committee and such. But
right.
So I had their support, so it was a done deal, and I was endorsed. The election, it was great. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I was involved with, state house issues at the time as well as city. I understand what was going on. And being a union member and things, there was a lot of bills and things that were being pushed at the state house in terms of union activity and what have you. I did pretty well. I got 41% of the vote.
Okay.
And people were like, "You got to be kidding me." And I kept telling them during my election that, look, I know I can do real well in Clintonville. I said, that's my base. And so nobody had received 41% of the vote ever that had run against E.J. Thomas, with the exception of one candidate who raised $250,000, and she was from Worthington. And she was, I believe she was either on the school board or a city council woman at the time. So she had pretty good name recognition. But other than that, I was the top vote getter out of, I think it was, 7 elections that he had actually faced. So I did pretty well. So, they said, "Oh, this is great." I wanted to run again in 2000. He's term limited. They said, okay. 2000 comes along. My friend Mark Hatch, who actually lived on Northwood when I lived on Oakland, and we knew each other real well. He was on the area commission, University Area Commission at the time, and then back then, and then he was the school board president during 2000. Well, Mark said he wanted to run, and it was just like, so they endorsed Hatch in the primary.
Okay.
He said, I tried to get him not to endorse anybody, but that's the way it goes in politics. They're always going to endorse their person in the primary, and
right.
They shouldn't, but they did. And Mark's name was on the sample ballot, so that was the end of it.
Yep.
Pretty much. And a couple years after that, they said, well, Joe, you should run for school board and get name recognition and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, you should do this and you should do that. And I said, this isn't for me. I'm not going to sell my soul to you people, and you're not going to tell me when to run, what to run for, how to think, and so forth. So about 2002 or so, I got out of the party politics.
Okay.
And somebody, it's been several years ago, Judge Eileen Paley. Mm-hmm. She was real involved back then with me. We knew each other real well. We were friends, and she was working her way up the ladder at the time back in 2000 and such. And we met at an event, and she said, Joe, I like you. She goes, but, you went to the dark side. And just jokingly, and I smiled, and I said, Eileen, I like it there. That's where I belong. and we laughed, and we're all friends, and everybody, I respect everybody's, in politics and the way they think and such, but it's politics. It is what it is. So ever since then, I've been out there kind of just, speaking my mind and being outspoken about the issues and not following the party, in terms of, I'm not part of the party machine anymore.
Right.
And that's fine with me, because that's allowed me to be more candid and to express myself in terms of how I feel about the issues. And I'm not somebody... who I do my homework. I do my research. I understand the issues at hand. I ran in 2003, I believe it was, for city council primary, and even got endorsed by the Columbus Dispatch. Some people said that's probably why you lost, Joe. But no, it was, I was like, well, I was shocked, to be honest with you. I thought, oh my gosh, they endorsed me. This is great. And then I think it was 2000, I ran as a write-in a few times just to challenge candidates, at candidate events and such. And I was on the ballot again in 2009, I believe, was a primary, and then 2019 for city council, and then this race for mayor. So I've been on the ballot 6 times.
This is not your first rodeo.
Yeah, including state rep. So actually official candidate 6 times on the ballot in 28 years. And that's not as much as my opponent.
Trying to keep it high level, given
Sure.
our timing.
Yeah.
Why are you running for mayor?
You know,
And I do
sure.
want to preface this by saying your issue areas and your platform are available at your website. We can hit on them high level, but you're running against an incumbent. Why are you running for mayor?
Yeah, you know, everything I've talked about, you know, is pretty much prepared me for this. And I think it's been kind of a gradual, you know, evolution and into, you know, what I've been doing, having run for state rep, council, and now mayor. And one of the things that probably drives me is that I know so much about how it works.
Okay.
And that's what drives me, and who and why things get done. And I don't see things getting done that really pertain to the working class and low to moderate income people. I see just the rich, the powerful, special interests, the developers, corporations, institutions here in Columbus that are the primary, ones that are benefiting from city tax dollars and such. It's almost like everything being done in this city, nearly everything, is to enhance and protect the investments of the rich and powerful in this city, and why things get done. And that's what drives me. It's just, I know why and who, and I continue to fight it. And I mean, I'm continuing to fight for the people in the neighborhoods of the city, and that's just not a stump speech. That's the facts, and people know that. I get contacted by people all across the city to ask for my help. I don't know who these people are, and they call me, or somebody called them and said, you should talk to Joe Motil. You should see if he can help you. Because he understands this, and he can get you through the process and do what he can to help. And I always have. And I mean, whether it's the West Side, whether it's recently like the Greyhound bus station or the Little Turtle Little Turtle roadway project.
Yeah.
I mean, development projects across the city. I'm still involved with things that take place in the university area. They call me up, even though I'm still involved at Tuttle Park, but development's a big issue of mine. I've worked in the construction industry. I'm retired now, but for 40 years. Mm-hmm. And I worked as a union labor for 24 and as a construction safety manager for 14. So I have a very good understanding in terms of what it's like to work as a blue collar worker. Mm-hmm. I raised my two kids working as a union labor. And then fortunately enough, I landed a job in safety and worked on 5 projects that were all over $100 million, where I spent 2 to 3 years on. One of them, the most expensive one, and last one was the Mount Carmel Grove City Hospital, which was a $355 million project. I was in charge of safety at that job. I had 535 workers on there at one time. But so I've had a taste of what it's like to work as a blue collar worker and as a white collar worker. I've sat at tables with engineers, architects, owners, CEOs, presidents in meetings nearly on a weekly basis on construction sites. Our team out at Mount Carmel Grove City was probably 30 people, and I worked at I was in charge of safety at the Dublin Methodist Hospital, the convention center remodeling and renovation project for 9 months, the large project for Motil out in West Jefferson, a large dorm project at Ohio University. I worked over at the student union for Ohio State University. I mean, so I understand construction, I understand development, things of that nature, and I understand, as an artist and a musician and athlete, that's really, I think, contributed to forming my views in my life, socially and economically, having been able to interact with different people from different social and economic backgrounds, and that's helped me tremendously to understand, what I do and whose needs are, what needs people need and so forth.
Do you feel like, having operated outside of the system for so long, you'd have difficulty governing?
Outside of the system?
Outside of, you haven't been in city government.
Oh, well, I think I understand city government pretty well. I mean, I've actually probably been involved with almost every city department at some point in time in my life. So, yeah, I mean, seriously, it's Department of Development, whether it's code enforcement, the Recs and Parks. I mean, numerous departments I've been involved with. So I understand how city government works.
There you go.
Yeah.
And folks can learn more about your platform and the initiatives that you'd like to accomplish as mayor on your website, and that'll be linked in the show notes for this episode. I guess to get to the beginning of the end of this interview, is there more that you'd like folks to know, the listeners of this podcast and Columbus Underground specifically?
Sure. And that website is joemotil.com. Pretty simple. But, and I read, Columbus Underground, I get it on my email server and such. And, I know what a lot of the concerns and issues are pertaining to those that are listening to this. And I just want people to know, especially like affordable housing. I've heard people mention, say things about me and the fact that I'm against density and this, that, and the other. And I just want people to know that, no, I am not against density. My issue has always been, and my feelings about density has always been about where and how much. I mean, I am not opposed. I am opposed to like 13-story buildings at Lane and High and things like that that are inappropriate for the character of certain neighborhoods. But I am not against high density. I'm not against building doubles and 4-unit buildings in secondary streets and things like that, ADUs and what have you. So again, I think there's some issues on my website that can address that, and people can also go there and ask me comments about it. Some of the other things I am an avid bicyclist, as many people know, and some people don't. But I've been riding a bicycle since I was 18 years old. Used to ride to work and things of that nature, and continue to ride. And I do believe in protected bike lanes, and I understand it. I get it, and I want to incorporate more and more protected bike lanes in the city. We're not doing a good enough job with that. Parking lots, empty parking lots. I hear that to be a lot of concerns in the downtown area and what to do with them. And I agree that, we should be building on them. But the problem with building more and more downtown on these empty parking lots, we're putting the cart before the horse, because we do not have transit in this city. That's worth a darn. I'm sorry, but it's mediocre at best. So if we're going to build on these empty parking lots, let's get our transit system together beforehand, because where are these people going to park that work in these buildings if we don't have proper transit? I'd also would like to see some of these empty parking lots turned into parks. And that would be, for instance, the city purchasing the land and turning it into green space. The climate change is just, we have one of the worst cities in the United States in terms of heat island effect, air pollution. Canopy coverage is 22%. I mean, we can do a lot better in terms of growing trees around the city of Columbus. I see empty tree boxes up and down High Street all over the place. And I keep hearing how we're going to grow more and more trees, but I don't see it happening. I can do a lot better job in terms of working as mayor of this city to make sure that, there's better tree canopy coverage. It's just not being done. And I'm sorry, but I don't see it happening under our current mayor. Those are just a few of the things. And as some of you know, I'm very active with the homelessness as well. They invited me to some encampments about 2 years ago, some of the homeless advocates, to see firsthand what's going on in these encampments and such. And I've learned a tremendous amount in terms of, what needs to be done to help our homeless. And I have a housing first initiative on my website that I hope people that will go to and read more about that, and read about my affordable housing initiatives. It's nothing compared to what the city's proposing. We need a steady stream of revenue to address our affordable housing crisis. And that's addressed on my website as well, in terms of increasing the hotel motel tax for the affordable housing trust fund from 8.43% to 25%. The city has been sitting on ARP funds for over 2 years, $187 million. That number's gone down quite a bit, but it's unconscionable that they haven't spent any of that money in terms of to buy affordable housing units. And my plan is on there as well. There's a lot more that we can be doing that Columbus Partnership, I said, should create their own affordable housing trust fund. Why aren't they? The 80 richest corporations and developers in the city of Columbus, or Central Ohio, are you kidding me? They should have their own trust fund. It just burns me when I read, in the news the other day, Franklinton, 10 affordable housing units. I mean, so what? Are you kidding me? What is 10 units? If the Columbus Downtown Development Corporation actually wants to do something about affordable housing, then let's put 200 units on the Scioto Peninsula. I mean, I hear the word NIMBY being tossed around all the time by people saying, Joe Motil's a NIMBY, this person's a NIMBY. It looks to me like some of the corporations are NIMBYs and some of these big developers are NIMBYs. Why aren't they building a lot of affordable housing units in places like the Scioto Peninsula and more and more? 10 units here, 20 units there, set aside units for tax abatements isn't getting it done. I'm sorry, but it's counterproductive for the tax abatements and such. That's meager in terms of the amount of affordable housing units that we truly need. And when we're saying affordable housing, we're talking 60% AMI for people making $40,000 and less. So think about that too when you read my website. I know I could go on and on about this, but please just take a look at my website, everybody. It's very extensive. It doesn't cover 100% of my platform, but it probably covers about 80% of it. So, and if you have comments or questions, you can make those comments and questions and email them to me, and I'll read them and I'll get back to you.
Well, and I was going to say, I bet you're willing to talk about it. Any
Absolutely.
concerns folks have. I end every interview with 2 questions. What do you think Columbus is doing well, and what do you think Columbus is doing not so well?
Boy, what is Columbus doing well? Well, they're getting jobs. I mean, we are people are coming to this city, and we're expanding our economically and financially. But the problem is, it's not trickling down. It's only going to certain people, and we're protecting those investments. And if we continue to build like market rate housing, it's for the labor pool of corporate Columbus and institutions, it's just going to get worse. Homelessness is getting worse. Evictions are by the dozens every day. And if sure, everybody says we need to build and build more houses. I don't disagree with that, but it's never going to catch up in terms of providing truly affordable housing with the more housing we're going to build. If somebody can tell me when that's going to happen, I'd like to hear your number, because I don't think it's going to happen. I think it's 5 to 10 years away. And what are we going to do in the meantime? Mm-hmm. Sure, we can keep building and building and building, and all the market rate housing that's being built, the job center is going to be saturated with market rate housing, and people that truly need to live near the job center so they don't have to live 20 miles away or 15 miles away. They're not going to have housing. So we need to create more truly affordable housing near the job centers. And I think, and as mayor, that again, and I have said this on the record, that I want to buy property, put out an RFP to a nonprofit organization, housing, and let's build it in the core area of the city. So there's a lot of those lots around that we could do that on. And we need to do more of it if we're really going to do something about providing affordable housing in our job centers in these desirable neighborhoods, because sooner or later it's going to become unaffordable for everybody.
Joe, thanks for your time.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's great.
Thank you for listening to the Confluence Cast presented by Columbus Underground. Again, you can get more information on what we discussed today in the show notes for this episode at theconfluencecast.com. Please rate, subscribe, share this episode of the Confluence Cast with your friends, family, contacts, enemies, your favorite advocate. If you're interested in sponsoring the Confluence Cast, get in touch with us. We can be reached by email at info@theconfluencecast.com. Our theme music was composed by Benji Robinson. Our producer is Philip Cogley. I'm your host, Tim Fulton. Have a great week.